So there are two things I feel like you need to know about me. The first is that I've always wanted to be a YouTuber. And the second is that I've always loved cars. And the reason that I've always loved cars is very much my dad. My dad was a big car guy. His first car was an MGB, which is a very strange car to buy as your first car. It's incredibly unreliable, but he loved it. He would take it to all these autocross events and drive it everywhere. And when I was a kid, my dad would take me to all these car shows. He never really had very interesting cars. He drove a lot of Toyota Prii, if that's the, plural version, I think. But the thing he'd always wanted more than anything was a Porsche 911. I remember every time a Porsche 911 would drive by us, he would be like, that's the most beautiful car ever made. And I remember we would go to dealerships when he didn't have the money to buy one. We would take test drives. He just never actually made that dream a reality. I think he wanted to at some point, but sadly he ended up getting cancer when I was in high school, and he never got the chance to buy a Porsche 911. So something that I always wanted to do was get a Porsche 911 because it's the car that he loved, the car that got me into cars, and I didn't really think it was possible at this early of an age. However, I started a car YouTube channel that actually ended up working. I started a lot of YouTube channels. Most of them didn't work. No one watched them. But every time I did one, I would learn something, and eventually I figured out how to make a channel that actually did get views. And that channel was called Captain Crankshaft, still is. And I started the channel doing just car news. Couldn't afford any cars, so I thought the only way I could make content about cars is talking about cars. So I had an extra room, and I painted a wall like the Golf livery, made videos with that as the background, talking about, different cars that were coming out and all the things happening in the automotive world. And eventually, that started to actually do well and make some money. But the goal was always to find a way to actually do stuff with cars on the YouTube channel, and specifically a 911 at some point. The first brand deal that we ever got was really small. I think it was a couple $100s. However, we used that money to take our first trip, and we were super scared that it wouldn't be worth it. We just spent all the money in our bank account going down to this car show, Amelia Island in Florida, and we thought that somehow we'd maybe get a ton of content while we were there, could film with a lot of cars, and also hopefully meet some people that would help our YouTube channel out. And I remember being in the media room. We got media passes. Somehow we convinced them to give them to us. But we were in the media room, and my business partner, Will, wanted to figure out if there was any events going on for influencers, which is a funny thing to say, I guess. But he went up to some guy who worked at the show, and he told us that there was a dinner happening that night. And we were like, okay, we should go to this dinner. So we show up at the dinner. We're standing outside, and the people that actually show up are Ed and Freddie and Hoovie's Garage, also Chris Brewer, who worked for Haggerty at the time. And we sort of, I think, convinced them that we belonged. I don't know if we were really supposed to be there, but we all had dinner together. And during that dinner, it was Ed and Freddie who convinced us to take the risk and buy our first project car, because we had told them that we really wanted to buy a car and start working on cars on the channel compared to just doing the automotive news. When we got back, we were trying to decide what car we wanted to buy. And the only choice in my head was a Porsche 911 because of that connection. And I just thought it would be so cool for our first build to be this tribute to my dad and a tribute to like what got me into cars. But I wasn't sure if we'd even be able to afford it, to be honest. So we went on Auto Tempest, and we sorted it by lowest price, which is something I do every time that I go on Auto Tempest, because it's usually the only thing I can afford. And it happened to be the cheapest Porsche 911 that was a coupe and a manual, happened to be 15 miles from my house. So it almost felt like fate. And I called Will immediately, and I was like, we have to go look at this car. As we're going to look at the car, I'm calling every bank that I can to see if a bank is willing to finance, because I didn't have the cash on hand, was willing to finance a 30-year-old car that had almost 200,000 miles, and no bank was willing to touch it, unsurprisingly. However, we did eventually find kind of a sketchy bank to give us the money, but it did work out, and we were able to purchase our first project car. Like I said, couldn't afford it, couldn't afford any of the parts to put on it, but it was my first 911, and I really couldn't have cared what shape it was in because it just meant so much to me. And we started our very first build series as a tribute to my dad, built it into a Safari 911. We had no idea if we would be able to do it. It was a very bold task, but we wanted to take this crummy old 911 and transform it into this rally lifted Safari car, which is something that my dad would have loved because he loved outdoor adventure and things like that. It was not an easy build. Like I said, the entire thing was sort of a crazy idea. Buying it in the first place was crazy. But then deciding that we wanted to turn it into the Safari car was crazy because there was only one company that even made the parts to do it, and we couldn't afford them. So I don't know really what we were thinking or what got into us, but we slowly started to modify the car. So we started with parts that we actually could get our hands on, and we could only do it when the paychecks hit. We were like begging brands for money and being like, trust me, this video is going to do so well, which we weren't even sure if that was going to be the case. Luckily, it worked out because we poured so much effort into it. So we started off with the easy stuff that we could get our hands on, like the exhaust, and we modified the interior. And those videos were so spaced out, we were still making all the car news videos to try to fund this build, which was getting views, but was draining our bank account rapidly. And I was hoping the entire time that the engine wasn't going to explode, because if it did, that would sink the entire ship and we would have no money to resolve the problem. And we finally get to the point where we're like, okay, we need to start lifting this car. That's the goal. That's what we've told people we want to do. So we need to figure out how to do it. I feel like we came up with this crazy idea. We had no way of executing it. So we just start messaging people who we think could figure something like that out. And one of those people happened to be 996 Road Trip, Brock, who is well known in the Porsche community. He was the guy who first put like a roof tent on a Porsche, and now that's all a big thing. So I messaged him and I'm like, hey, I want to put a lift kit on a 996, and there's only one company who makes it, and it's too expensive. And he was like, I want to do the same thing. And I was like, and I want to have it ready by Car Week of 2023. And he was like, I want to do the same thing. And I was like, well, perfect. Let's figure that out. I'm sort of, I think, piggybacking onto his plans, but he's so nice that he sort of just let it happen. However, the conversation sort of just died off. We said we were going to do it, hadn't heard from him in a while, and Will actually flew out to Luftekult in California and ended up seeing Brock in person and actually convinced him to sort of finally let us get some of the parts and help with the whole process. So our car ended up being a prototype car for the lift kit that now he's producing, which was really just incredible luck. I don't know how that happened. The universe is crazy sometimes, but we figured out how to get it done. It actually all came together 3 days before Car Week. We drove the car unlifted down to North Carolina, to Charlotte, to Eurowise, who was helping him build everything. And 2 days later, we had a lifted 911, which is crazy. And it was this wild transformation from this little silver 911 with 180,000 miles. The miles didn't change, but it turned into this lifted pink 911 with lights, and it was just the coolest thing ever. And I love that car. I'm never selling that car. It really pushed the YouTube channel off the ground. The car news stuff worked, but this was our very first build. It's what we really wanted to be doing. And it also, this connection to my dad. Every time I drive it, I feel like he's there with me. And it's just the best car ever. I don't care if I get a Pagani ever. I'd love to get a Pagani, but that car will forever be my favorite car. I don't care what else is out there. It's just the greatest thing ever.
This month of VINwiki Car Stories is brought to you by Bridgestone. We've talked a lot this year about the Potenza range of tires for sports cars and supercars, but what I'm personally most excited about right now is the Dueler AT Ascent. It is their latest and greatest tire for on-road and off-road capability. I've tried so many tires for my off-road kinds, but this really seems like it's going to be perfect. It's got full-depth interlocking 3D sipes and it is their latest and greatest product, so it should give me all the off-road capability and wet and snow and everything else that I want to put it through, as well as much better road manners. So check them out as well as the whole range of Bridgestone products to find out what's perfect for your ride at the link in the description below, and look forward to more amazing content on VINwiki from Bridgestone.